right. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. The name of our session on the screen here, Entertaining the Masses, From Operations to Strategy. This is a brief history of Redbox use, or excuse me, of Tableau use at Redbox.
So not sure who's familiar with Redbox here. Probably most of you guys have interacted with the brand at one point, but who we are. So Redbox is the world's largest automated retail provider of movies and games. And what makes us a little bit unique is we have a very, very large retail network. So currently we have over 40,000 kiosks in the US across 32,000 locations. So very large presence there. And as a company, we've been around for just over 10 years and recently passed a pretty large milestone in our 5 billionth rental. So also, Pete and I are going to talk. We're from two different teams. So I work on the strategy and analytics team at Redbox. Essentially, the strategy and analytics team, it's really an insights-driven and data-driven team. So our team will work on a variety of different initiatives, whether they're merchandising, optimization, or on the network strategy side, and we'll really use our internal data to guide not only the strategy, but all the way through the implementation of these initiatives.
And I'm part of the operations analytics team. Our team is actually focused solely on our operations part of our business. Whether it's merchandising our kiosks or servicing them when they break, our team is involved in driving efficiencies across our network in both of those aspects of our business. In terms of our presentation, Redbox was actually fortunate enough to present at the Tableau conference 3 years ago in Washington, D.C. And today we're actually going to give you a brief history of the 3 years since we last presented for Tableau and show you what we've been up to and how we've been leveraging Tableau to make us more successful. So real quick bios, just some intros for us here. My name is Pete Nelson. I manage our operations analytics team. I've been with the company almost 8 years now. And over the last several years, my primary focus has been partnering with our operations leaders to identify efficiencies in our network and really drive toward those. Again, both on the merchandising and on the service side of our business.
I'm Steve Fickus. As I said earlier, I work on the strategy and analytics team. And I've been a part of a major merchandising initiative at Redbox called Rebalancing, which we'll talk a little bit about later in the presentation. But the last 2 years, I've primarily focused on our network strategy efforts. It's been a big area of the company and just making sure that with that large presence, we are really moving and changing as our business changes.
So today we're going to focus on 3 key areas where Tableau has had great influence in our business. The first is near and dear to my heart, as I mentioned, it's operations. Again, we're looking at performance tracking for all of our field operations teams. We're putting information in our field leaders' hands to help them make decisions at a moment's notice. We're also working on our merchandising side of the business, and specific to this presentation, a little bit later, we're going to get into how we've leveraged Tableau and allowed our field leaders to be able to make decisions on the merchandising side of our business at the click of a button and at a moment's notice. Our teams also partner together. And so in the middle there, you see we have operations and merchandising strategy. Our teams partnered together once we were able to optimize our merchandising network to roll out a strategic initiative that allows us to transfer inventory from kiosks that may have a surplus of a given title into kiosks that maybe don't have enough of that title. Some of you may know we have something that's called a rent and return anywhere model. It allows you, the customer, to rent that disc today down the street, take it home with you when you leave the conference and return it in your hometown. That's okay. Great for, obviously, for the customers, creates a bit of an inventory nightmare for us. So our 2 teams partnered together on an initiative that we call rebalancing. And then also just putting together a dashboard that allowed our field teams to begin to track their performance in that initiative and also understand where we could make improvements.
Yeah, because this field, as Pete mentioned, with rebalancing, ultimately it was a process that involved all 1,000 of our field employees, and it was layering on additional complexities to an already challenging merchandising process. So it was really Tableau that helped drive some of those performance improvements and making sure that that program was a success. And finally, we'll wrap up talking a little bit about the network optimization side, how we used Tableau in 2015 to really shape and drive removal decisions around some unproductive kiosks that we had in our network, and also how we've leveraged it to improve and enhance some of our site selection capabilities as a company. And here you see this timeline just shows when all 3 of these topics that we're going to cover occurred from 2013 through 2016. It also really represents a little bit of an evolutional timeline of how the organization has just continued to rely more and more heavily on analytics and tools like Tableau to drive and shape the decisions that we make.
So let's talk a little bit about operations. Our Redbox field teams are tasked with merchandising roughly 60 million discs, new release movies and games, into our network of kiosks each year. That network of kiosks consists of roughly 40,000 kiosks, and it's a task that falls on the shoulders of about 1,000 field employees. They repeat that task weekly to make sure that the newest release movies and games are in the kiosks ready for all of you to rent on Tuesday morning as soon as they're available. Prior to 2012, that process consisted of a warehouse receiving a bulk shipment of product, and then they threw a party. They all got together, they all started sorting that product, putting labels on it, and determining where it needed to go according to pick lists. It was a very manual process. There were a lot of hands, there were a lot of touch points that were involved in that process, and as you can imagine, the more hands and the more touch points you introduce into a process, there's more opportunity for either late delivery, or in extreme cases, no delivery at all. In mid-2012, we actually partnered with a third party who took on the task of sorting, labeling, and distributing all of our product. The product was distributed according to the kiosk that it was intended to be loaded into. They took away a lot of that administration time from our field teams. They no longer had to do all of that work. The box was given to them with the kiosk ID on the side. They now know where it needs to be loaded in. We call it kiosk-specific or pick-to-kiosk inventory. The next step after we had optimized how the inventory was being packaged was to optimize how it was being delivered out into the network. Prior to this, the directive was just get it in. Do your best, get it in on time, make sure it's there so that customers can rent it. But we knew there was a more efficient way. So in 2013, we actually introduced our route optimization process. Every merchandiser's route was optimized. And you can see there on the screen, there's a little sample of what a route might look like. Some of you may be able to see the house right there, that the merchandiser would leave from. Each dot along the way represents a stop in their route, and it brings them all the way back home. This was done in an optimal fashion, keeping in mind lowest number of miles, lowest amount of time, ultimately saving us money as a business. Once those two initiatives were in place and we had realized some time savings, we obviously had to begin to track where that product was going and understand, was it getting into the kiosk that we were intending it to get into? It created a new challenge for our field supervisors. We had accomplished one great goal. We had eliminated a lot of the administration time, a lot of the time that was being taken by our field teams in the field to sort and label and distribute all of that product. But in its current state, all we had done has replaced it with load time. There were reports that were created to accomplish all of these goals, but each one needed to be run and compiled and exported individually in order to see the big picture. So let's talk a little bit about those reports. What you see here is a sample of 4 different reports on the screen, and these are the reports that early on in the process, our field leaders were running each and every day to get the big picture and understand what was going on out in their network. The first report, our supervisors are instructed to ask 4 main questions when it comes to getting their network merchandised. The first is, which kiosks should I be focused on? I may have 400 kiosks in my network, but maybe not all of them have been visited yet. I need to know which ones have been visited. Remember that I told you we routed all of our kiosks, and that first report shows you day in sequence of when those kiosks are intended to be visited. Now the supervisor can look very quickly and understand which ones may have already been visited, which ones will be visited later in the week, and now has narrowed down that set of kiosks to know exactly what it is they need to be concerned with and what they should be looking for. As a supervisor, and let's take the case of Wes Anderson, our supervisor in the Austin, Texas market here. As a supervisor, Wes then wants to know, of the kiosks that have been visited, which ones have product that's not yet showing up? Where do I need to take action? So the second report shows Wes, you have 2 kiosks right now that have discs that have not yet been loaded, meaning they're not yet recognized in inventory, but they've already been visited. These are kiosks that Wes can motivate on immediately. You can see here we've got 2 kiosks. The first one has 1 disc not yet loaded. The second has 4 for a grand total of 5. Matt McConaughey's slipping up here. The next report, or the next question that Wes would ask himself is, what titles are those? What discs am I looking for? We're missing 5. What 5 are they? A third report gives Wes all the details he needs to know by kiosk ID, which titles haven't been loaded yet, and the barcodes that are associated with them. We have a few savvy field leaders out there that can take a look at that kiosk ID there, 9203, and tell you exactly where it is from memory. This guy, not so much. A fourth report can bring it up and tell you where is that kiosk. It's going to show me address, city, state, zip, as well as the vendor. Give me a better idea of where that kiosk is located. Because if I need to motivate to go out there, or if I need to motivate one of my field technicians, I'd like to be able to make my decisions geographically and make them as smart as possible. So all 4 of these reports serve an individual purpose, but all 4 of them also feed into the big picture. And all of them needed to be combined in order to see the big picture. Now, there wasn't much of a standard. There weren't really any best practices that were involved. But what we found is that many of our more Excel-savvy field leaders would take all of these reports, drop them into an Excel file, and through a series of macros and VLOOKUPs and all that other fun stuff, they'd come up with something that looks like that. And that's what they would work off of every single morning. Now, I already told you about the load time, and I told you about the challenges of combining all of these reports. And at the end of the day, this was the best we could come up with. And not everybody was using this. Some of our less savvy folks were waiting for their peers to create something for them and send it to them. Not very efficient. And at the end of the day, I don't know about you, but to me that looks like an eyesore. And my eyes would start to bleed after looking at it for a minute or two. So my team was tasked with finding a better way. How can we recreate this and put it in the hands of our field team and make them more efficient, make them able to make decisions at a moment's notice and recognize when they have decisions that need to be made? So in 2014, we released what we refer to as our weekly merchandising dashboard. And we're going to share that dashboard with you today. It's a live dashboard, again, that puts all of that information into an easy-to-use package for our field leaders so that they can make the right decisions day to day and do so in a timely fashion. So we're going to go ahead and switch over and do a demo on that dashboard for you here. All right. So here we have our weekly merchandising dashboard. A couple things I want to point out real quick. You can see down the side there, we've got a list of all of our regional supervisors. We give them the opportunity to work in several different weeks. We've also visualized our network on the map there, and we've partnered with Mapbox to actually do street level maps. They're a little bit more informative, especially for our field team that equates things to exactly where they're located, what street, what intersection, things like that. So you're looking at a little bit more detailed map. The rest of it's pretty empty, and you're probably asking yourself, well, why? What we've done is we've created a tool that works with click actions, and it drives the activity of the supervisor. It tells them what they need to know. We've tried to make it as intuitive and interactive as possible, but yet also a little bit instructive. So I'm Wes, I'm the supervisor, and I open up the dashboard in the morning. I need to find out what's going on in my network. Well, we've got a long list of supervisors down the side there. If I want to make it a little bit easier, why don't we just select Wes's supervisor? Her name's Laura Croft. As soon as we select Laura Croft, you're going to see a couple things happen. The map is filtered down. That is our Gulf region in Texas. And you can see now only the supervisors that report to Laura are listed there on the left. All Wes needs to do is find his name in the list and click on it. As soon as he clicks on his name, you can see now we've got some information across the top. Now we're in business. Now we can get started. There's a couple key metrics to draw your attention to at the top. Remember the 4 key questions that I mentioned a few slides ago. Field leaders are asking themselves. The first one, which kiosks have already been visited? Those are the only ones I care about right now. If Steve hovers over that 91.69%, Wes has 409 kiosks in his market, but only 375 have been visited to date. Those are the 375 that he's concerned with. You can see within the tooltip, we've provided an instruction that if Wes wants more information, all he needs to do is click. When he does, you can see that a section is popped open on the right-hand side there. We're using a technique that I've heard a lot of different names. I call it shelving. I call it using a cabinet because it's like pulling out drawers. It's a very efficient way to make use of your space when you have a lot of information that you want to get into one dashboard, but you don't want it to be cluttered. So Steve has clicked there. It's pulled out that drawer at the top to show us the route completion percentage for all of our folks in our market. I may be curious, as Wes, I may want to know, well, why is Matthew only at 93.83%? And I can hover over that bar, and it tells me he's got 81 kiosks and he's visited 76. So there's 5 I'm not yet concerned about. If I want to know what 5 those are, it just says click. Again, instructive. It's telling the supervisor what they need to know. We've clicked, another drawer has popped open below, and it's showing us the 5 kiosks that Matthew has not yet visited, along with the inventory that's intended to be loaded into them when he does. Nice part about this shelving, again, as I mentioned, and making use of the space, one click to put it all away. I'm done looking at the route completion, so let me click on that 91.69% again. Maybe. There we go. Apparently people know I'm online, sorry. But you can see by clicking the 91.69%, it's closed back up that section on the right. There's another metric up there at the top, accuracy. You see that it's 100%. That 100% is only, again, referring to the kiosks that have been visited so far. So if Steve hovers over that 100%, remember, we're only concerned with 375 kiosks right now, and you can see all 375 have been loaded accurately, meaning they have the inventory in them that was intended to be loaded into them. It's the delivery number Wes is concerned about. It's not at 100%. Why? Now he's going to go ahead and he's going to dive in. Again, we've got click functionality here. We hover over, we can see there's 5 disks that are not yet loaded. And again, it says click for an FSR level. So when Steve clicks, you're going to see another drawer pop open on the right. We're using color here. Should pop off the page immediately. We got one guy with an issue. That Matthew McConaughey. He's got, if Steve hovers over, 5 disks not yet loaded. I want to know what 5 disks are those. Remember those questions, again, that the field leaders are asking. Which 5 disks are they? All we have to do is just click. We can see which kiosks. Again, this should look familiar. We saw this a couple slides ago. We've duplicated the report that tells us which kiosks don't yet have their inventory. Remember, another question that a leader might ask themselves is, where is that kiosk? Well, we've got a map and we've made use of highlight actions. So as you hover over any one of those kiosks, you'll see that it highlights on the map. And again, just gives a little more information to the field leaders so that they understand what they're up against. That last question, what product hasn't been loaded? What are the titles that I'm looking for? Well, again, as we hover over those kiosks, all we have to do is click to drop down a 4th section. We call it our ship not loaded section. This is product that's been shipped but hasn't been recognized in a kiosk yet. That's the 1 disk for kiosk 9203. If Steve holds shift and clicks on the next kiosk, I now have a comprehensive report that I can export to a crosstab and send it out to one of my field technicians so they can motivate. This entire process just took us less than 5 minutes in what was taking our field leaders hours every single day to compile. Again, it's made us much more efficient in the way that we merchandise our network and really drawn out the issues that need to be addressed in real time.
And as Pete mentioned earlier too in the slide, we're doing 60 million disks a year. So you might look at that delivery number and say, well, 99.95% is quite high. But even if we're able to use a tool like this and correct that, I mean, we could be talking about 30,000 disks a year that are currently lost, just in that 5/100ths% difference. So really huge efficiencies that were driven across the organization.
Yep. So let's go ahead and switch back here. I'll let you click next. Okay. So getting back onto the timeline. From an operations standpoint, we've optimized our merchandising processes. We've optimized our routes. We know when and where people should be, at what kiosk they should be loading at any given time. we've also gone ahead and optimized the way that the product is being delivered. We still have a challenge. That product can be returned anywhere. And so it creates those inventory imbalances that we talked about. It's a challenge that we thought about years ahead of time, saying there has to be a better way for us to go ahead and balance out that inventory. Couldn't take those next steps until we had optimized our merchandising processes. So with those in place, Steve's team went ahead and got started on the build-out of the rebalancing initiative.
Pete mentioned the need for rebalancing and why it was a huge issue in our network. It goes back to the rent and return anywhere business model. Now, if you look at the chart here, around 2013, when our team started working at rebalancing, we were a mature network with over 39,000 kiosks. At that point in time, as you see on the slide on the left, we had over 75% of the US population within how we think about Redbox trade areas, a 5-minute drive time of a Redbox kiosk. It's a huge saturation of kiosks. And from a migration perspective, early on in 2006 and 2007, migration was difficult, no doubt, with product. But we had a couple thousand kiosks. As we expanded to 39,000, in 2013, 46% of our product that was rented from one kiosk ended up being returned to another kiosk altogether. And just less than 5% was rented from one kiosk and found its way into another city or another market altogether. So it was a little bit of a nightmare from an inventory perspective, and we knew we had to do something, which is where rebalancing came in. So I talked about those extreme examples of migration. Well, we have one here for you, which is one copy of Captain America Civil War. It's a new release out. So we started and merchandised and stocked a kiosk in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania with a copy of this disc. You see the red dots, that's how many times it rented. So it stayed in its area for quite some time, rented several times in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, before making its way up north and then deciding after a few rentals that it might be in search for warmer weather, and somehow, with a customer, it found its way all the way from East Coast to West Coast to California. So quite a little path of this trip, and coincident for this disc, and coincidentally enough, it did wind up in Austin, Texas, where it is currently stocked in a 7-Eleven kiosk. So that's a true story, and I encourage all of you to go out, and it's a great film, and at a very attractive price point of $1.50, might be something you consider some point during Tableau. So just a thought, throwing it out there. But again, you see these really ridiculous examples of migration that we had to correct through rebalancing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is rebalancing. So essentially, rebalancing was a process that we put in place, and it was a targeted in-route transfer of disk from overstocked kiosks that had too many copies of a disk due to migration to understocked kiosks. And the way this program worked was essentially this. Let's take an example and pretend that kiosk 1 and 2 are in the same route structure. So they fall in that same path that Pete outlined earlier in the presentation. Now, if kiosk 1, due to migration, originally starts with 12, but ends up having 6 more copies than it truly needs, then what we would do is we would rely on our field staff, and while they were currently merchandising the kiosk on a daily basis, we'd have them transfer those disks to another kiosk in their route that actually needed copies. So kiosk 1 has 6 more than it needs. Kiosk 2, towards the end of the route, needs 6 more due to migration, and so our field would go through and rebalance our inventory while they were stocking the kiosk on a typical basis, thus helping mitigate some of the issues that we were facing from an inventory imbalance perspective.
So in early 2014, we launched this rebalancing initiative. We also released a dashboard, because one of the things we realized as we launched this initiative is we'd never done anything like this before. We didn't know what success would look like. We didn't know how to measure it, but we knew we had a competitive field team. So within the constructs of the dashboard, which we'll show you now, we actually set it up such that our field would be able to see where success was taking place, or maybe where there were areas for improvement. This is our rebalancing dashboard. As I mentioned, it's been set up such that all of our field team is being compared against each other. Because again, we didn't know what success looked like, but we knew that our field team would tell us. And so we knew across a broad spectrum of 1,000+ field employees, we would find folks that were working efficiently and that we're meeting or exceeding our expectations for this initiative, and we would find folks that perhaps could stand to improve a little bit.
Yeah. So as Pete mentioned, rebalancing was rolled out in March 3rd of 2014 after we had finally felt very comfortable that from a merchandising perspective, we could account for absolutely everywhere our inventory was going. And so we built this dashboard so that we would have a week-by-week view that would also be able to be filtered by the various levels of management that are responsible for the people who directly merchandise the kiosk. So we started off and had filters by regional managers, which we have 20 of. They're the highest level of management. Regional supervisors who directly manage the people in the field, and so on. So you could quickly get at a detailed view of the people you were managing and how successful they were at rebalancing. And we started off with very simple metrics and trying to understand how efficient we were as an organization. The first one was straightforward. It was what percentage of the disk that we're trying to rebalance are actually making it into the kiosk. And in week 1, we were trying to rebalance just under 200,000 disks, and we rebalanced at about 71%. Pete talked about this. We really had absolutely no expectations whatsoever on how this would work. And in all honesty, 71% we were surprised we could roll out to 1,000 people and have it at that high of a degree right away. But we were tracking it there, and then we also knew that if it wasn't being rebalanced, it really could only fall into 2 buckets. It was being not removed, or it was being removed but ultimately not finding its way into a kiosk. So the way we set this dashboard up, and again, one of the best decisions that we made was to make sure that this dashboard was basically open for absolutely everyone in the organization and the company. So it wasn't something where you just logged in and saw the information that you were responsible for and your boss is responsible, and that's it. We had absolutely everything happening in this program available to all 1,000 people in our organization that were working in the field. And to kind of play on the field's competitiveness, we relied on this idea of relative performance. And the first chart, we looked at our regional managers and we're trying to figure out, there's the average percent that they're rebalancing and where each one of them falls in that category. And so from a relative perspective, anytime someone was 5% below average, they'd be marked in red. And if they were 5% above average, we'd mark them in green. So you'd immediately see what peers are doing well and what ones are struggling relative to performance. And it also helped because, again, we didn't know what right looked like, so this was the best way that we could kind of motivate people to find examples. Even if we're doing 71% in week 1, right away, there are people who are able to do it at 80+%. So you know your peers are having more success than you are. So this was just an example of the regional managers, and we also had a little bit more detailed view of our supervisors who are directly managing the people responsible for the disk. And then our field, who was responsible for rebalancing, that was a little bit of a different view where we looked at the number of disks they were rebalancing and the overall accuracy percentage. So we're going to walk through a couple of examples of how this worked and how our field actually ended up using this dashboard and how they were able to drive performance improvements by doing just this. So first thing we noticed and really wanted to drill into is why are there people that are struggling and below 71%? So the way this would be used is take someone like Travis Bickle, who in week 1 was at 61%. We'd know right away that that was below average, and it would be his responsibility to figure out who under them isn't performing up to par. So we'd click on his area, and now all of a sudden he's got every single regional supervisor that reports up to him and how they're doing from a rebalance perspective. So this is really valuable because everyone here could see everyone's performance, and you see right away that there's a massive amount of variability. So it's not like Travis's problems are widespread. He actually has people in the organization like Alvin who are doing very, very poor, below 50%, and then Amy, who's doing better than any other regional manager at an aggregate level. So right away, you know that there are learnings that he can find in his own organization as to what in particular is happening. And if Alvin was to scroll over, he would see that one of the main reasons that he isn't rebalancing at a high level is he's not following his routes. Now that wasn't something that was corrected immediately, but with a quick conversation, Travis got Amy and Alvin on the phone together and realized that Alvin had made route structures and failed to report it back to our model. So essentially he was running a different route that we had no idea, and rebalancing had a domino effect where he didn't have the right information. Something that wouldn't have been a huge deal prior to rebalancing, but now was, and was easily addressed within 1 week and could be solved for. And again, even Alvin could click in on his and then see that he does have people in his organization, people managing that are doing it at a high level. that much more easy to kind of motivate everyone else and say, what's going on here? Let's talk best practices and let's make sure we address this. So again, that's how it was used, and really, we ended up driving a lot of efficiencies, not because we knew it was happening right away, but because we leveraged essentially 1,000 people in the field and let them become analysts and let them figure out what's happening with the data and actively correct it. So that was the first week, and as you see, we're at 71%. By using this system, opening it up to everyone, 3 months later in the program, we were able to move from 71% rebalancing to over 90% for the entire organization. So we really blew away the expectations that we had, even for ourselves, but it was entirely because of the field's effort in being able to constantly and actively address any issues that were occurring within the larger perspective of this program. And I mentioned the 90%. At this point in time, just 3 months later, absolutely every one of our regional managers was performing at a level that was higher than originally what was the best level in week 1. So there's a tremendous amount of improvement, and they just kept motivating each other in a very, very almost hostile, aggressive way to continually raise that bar. So we just let it happen, and the performance went up, which was good. So that was a little bit about rebalancing, and now we're going to shift gears and focus to what the firm has been really focused on in the last 2 years, which is our network optimization efforts. Present this.
Is it not?
No. So we talked a little bit in migration about the fact that in 2013 and 2014, we were really expanding as a mature network, and we're at the point where we had 39,000 kiosks. No worries. So this is a view that, again, going through all of our merchandising problems just shows the kind of growth path that our company had. In 2005, we had less than 4,000 or 5,000 kiosks. Then from 2005 to 2013, we basically doubled in size, adding at least 5,000 kiosks every year. And that's what you see in the blue bar right there. And our annual rentals was growing as well each year, really having exponential growth to the point where in 2013, we reached our peak at doing just about 750 million rentals in a year. But what happened at that point in time is something that a lot of businesses face. We hit a point of maturity, and clearly we started to see our rentals were going down a little bit. We were facing some headwinds, and it was clear that moving forward, we weren't going to just be able to add 5,000 to 6,000 kiosks every year in order to achieve growth. We had to really start thinking strategically about where we put resources on the ground over the last 5 and 6 years and determine if they should still be there. And moving forward, we had to look, if we're not going to add 5,000 kiosks a year and we're going to do it at a much smaller number, then we've got to be far more strategic about sites that we do add. And again, take a broader look to figure out from like a kiosk optimization perspective, what's our network look like today, and are there kiosks that are performing poorly and shouldn't really be there and don't add anything to the business? So these are some of the tough decisions that we realized we had to start facing in 2014 and moving forward that became network optimization and a big focus for us. So again, 2014 is when we started focusing on it, and it was clear that there were inefficiencies in a network of 40,000 kiosks, but unfortunately, there were also huge inefficiencies in just how we approached the problem initially. Like the challenges that Pete faced earlier on in merchandising, we started off trying to understand our network by gathering just a series of Excel-based reports. So we'd look at one report that would show us, as a company, what's our overall level of performance. Then we'd start looking at account level views. We'd also have kiosk performance perspective. So we were trying to think about removal decisions by just looking at one kiosk at a time and how it was doing from a profitability perspective. And then I mentioned our density. We really think about density in terms of we have the most relationships within a 5-minute drive time. So we're trying to figure out, well, what do our channels look like by various density levels? And is this right, or are we overly dense in some areas? So we were approaching the problem one spreadsheet at a time, but we have a network of over 39,000 kiosks. So it was an incredibly linear approach to a network that has tons of interdependencies and can't simply be evaluated one kiosk at a time. So as we started focusing on network optimization, as a business, we became really fixated on the idea that we could definitely improve profitability moving forward if we weren't going to just expand by taking a more strategic look at our network and getting rid of some of the underperforming kiosks that had basically accumulated over the last couple of years due to rapid growth. So we knew heading into 2015, we were going to target a small percentage of our network, remove kiosks that really weren't adding any incremental revenue, and then try to improve profitability that way. So we were approaching it again with Excel sheets, and we knew we quickly had to kind of ramp up and find a better way in order to really put an active and comprehensive removal strategy in place by 2015. So we did just that. I was a part of the rebalancing initiative. We'd seen what Pete did in merchandising. It was clear that Tableau was a far more efficient way of approaching it, especially, as I mentioned, for a dynamic thing like network optimization that involves so many different parts and so many different dependencies. So we started getting all the data together and really put together some visualizations that helped us shape the removal strategy that we put in place for 2015. So now we're going to show you one of the dashboards that was one part, but a key part to how we came up with the 2015 removal strategy. So this is how we started thinking about our network. And you can see it's far more dynamic. It's easier to look at than all of these Excel spreadsheets. We started putting all of our kiosks in a map. And in the first chart you see, the color-coded one on my top left, is a view by state of how many kiosks we had across our network and how they were performing from a relative perspective. So it doesn't mean that if it was colored red, it was poor. It just meant they weren't performing as well as our network average. But again, it gave us a very good idea of what our performance looked like across a wider geography. And then we also took a view where we were able to look at it from a kiosk level perspective. And instead of having those individual Excel-based kiosk profitability reporting, we now had a view of where our underperforming kiosks sat on the map and how they related to each other. So it's far more dynamic. Some key metrics that we started to look at this time as we were thinking about the removal strategy, we looked at our total kiosk count. We also looked at our overall density in the network, and we realized that on average, one kiosk had at least 4.5 other kiosks in a 5-minute drive time. So there's a lot of saturation that existed there. This was one view. It was pretty startling to us and definitely helped shape the way we thought about the removal strategy. And this shows how many kiosks fall in each density bucket throughout our network. So the first one says that essentially only 4,000 or 10% of our network exists where there aren't other kiosks within a 5-minute drive time. Again, almost all retailers typically wouldn't put multiple stores in a 5-minute drive time, but Redbox is a far different business model. But we had a very low percentage of our network that actually existed in those kind of white space locations. And again, moving forward, you see these kiosks, they're all close to our average, and that wasn't of as much concern. But what was of concern was we were realizing that through that rapid expansion, we had pockets of extraordinarily high density. So we had 500 plus kiosks that existed with 12 other stores within a 5-minute drive time. That's a massive level of saturation that exists. And we even had examples where we were finding kiosks and we had 18, 19 stores all within a 5-minute drive time. So as a mature business, the way we were thinking about it, we knew we didn't need all of those resources in order to support that particular trade area. Another thing we added in this view was a parameter that we used to kind of think about market level density and performance. So this is the overall network, and then the market level view just showed you something slightly different where you could quickly visually see markets and then their average revenue index. So anything above this line were markets that were performing above average, and then the x-axis showed their network density. So we were really looking for, are there ones performing above average, and if they're in low density, that's excellent, but are there areas where we see potentially underperforming markets that have high density? And so going back up to the map up here, how we approach the removal strategy is we would start with a particular state, take Texas. We drill in on Texas, and now all of a sudden, we have a map of their entire kiosk network and how they relate to each other. We can quickly see and visually see where all the underperforming kiosks are in that particular area. And we also have the performance metrics, which are now filtered for Texas. So right away, we can see, well, it's a strong state. From a density perspective, it's a little bit higher than our network average. Another view, the market view, comes into huge assist right here. Because right away, we're able to identify if we're looking for markets that are underperforming and have high density. There's an area like McAllen, Texas. McAllen, Texas is performing 30–40% below average, but it has one of our highest density levels. So we could click on McAllen. And now we see all of the kiosks that exist in that area. And if you scroll up to one of the low-performing kiosks, you see that one. Okay, it's underperforming. It does about 30% of the average revenue, yet there are 6 other kiosks in a 5-minute drive time. So clearly, we could remove that resource and still support our entire business there without even really having an impact to customers at all. And so if you clicked on that, we were able to even leverage kiosk-level reports. Try the hyperlink one more time. Okay, well, we even leveraged essentially kiosk-level reports where we could see hyperlinked pictures of whether or not that was an indoor or outdoor machine. So we even had that granular level of data to understand exactly what we were doing in the network and to be able to drive decisions on that front. So that was a little bit of how we approached our overall removal strategy on network optimization. Again, moving from an organization that was looking at things in Excel and then realizing we could create something living and dynamic like this that would always update and allow us to have the most detailed level of view of what's happening in our network, when, where, and why. So that's on the removal side of things. But after we executed on our removal strategy in 2015, using those same type of views, we thought about site selection more critically, and it made perfect sense to be doing the same exact things that we were doing on the removal process side of things and site selection as well. So just because we weren't expanding and adding 3,000 or 4,000 kiosks a year, it still meant that if we were going to add resources on the ground, we wanted them to drive incremental revenue, and we wanted to place them in the right densities where they could really benefit our network. So before our site selection process, it was a little bit of a mess. We were just relying on account managers. They would submit us boatloads of Excel files by account, and we'd run them all through site selection. So we started gathering internal data sources and other data sources where we could basically see an entire universe of what sites Redbox is not currently in. And this is just a view that shows sites that we might be interested in the state of Texas. And you see there's 3,000 retailers there where we could potentially install a kiosk in the state of Texas. But again, linking it back to the removal strategy, we weren't trying to add to dense areas where we were already overly populated. So if we were going to add a site, we want it to be an area that had strong performance and also was in a lower density. So what we could do is we could quickly filter this site list and say, well, why don't I just look at sites where there's only one other kiosk within a 5-minute drive time from a Redbox perspective, and then get a drill down on a much smaller subset of sites that would be a great candidate to potentially go into. And now I've managed to shrink the list from 3,000 to 1,000. But again, we didn't want to just go into markets that were underperforming. We wanted to have markets that were strong, but for whatever reason, had low density. And so here we could also look at the surrounding Redbox performance and try to actually find areas where there were good sites near very strong kiosks, but for whatever reason, we didn't have very high density. And now all of a sudden, we've gone from 3,000 sites to 88. So we filtered it down dramatically. We can layer in other aspects that Tableau has from a mapping perspective, like population, to understand the trade areas that we're going in. And we can even look at it on a site level view and understand what does a Redbox kiosk look like where we're thinking about adding another install in the area, and what do these new site accounts look like as well. So again, it was far more dynamic, and we really started linking all the different pieces that interact together in network strategy, in part because we were leveraging Tableau.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot today. We've taken some time to identify a few issues that we faced as a company, how we faced those issues head on, and how we leveraged Tableau to help us solve some of those issues and become more efficient as an organization. But at the end of the day, what does all of that mean? What benefits did we really receive? What benefits did we realize as a result of these new processes and these implementations? On the operations side, from 2012 to 2013, we saw a 1% lift in our on-time delivery of our product. I want to take you back to that big number of 60 million discs that get merchandised in a year. Do the math in your head. That 1% lift is huge for us. And in 2013, that 1% lift in on-time delivery actually accounted for about a $1 million lift in revenue.
Then the rebalancing initiative. Rebalancing was a very big success. Really was able to actually correct our inventory imbalances. And overall, in 2014 alone, it added 1% in incremental revenue to the company. For a company that's doing 700 million rentals, that's extraordinarily valuable. But beyond that, rebalancing was a success in large part because we were able to do it efficiently and we were able to move disk at a very high percentage. So the 20 to 25% improvement that we were able to make just in 3 months from the field's performance really drove that entire initiative's success. And then on the network optimization side, we talked a little bit about how we're using these tools from a removal strategy. Well, in 2015, we executed and removed about 1,500 underperforming kiosks using those same approaches that we covered a few minutes ago. And that ended up resulting in improved profitability in the range of $4 to $5 million. And we've also, as I mentioned, started leveraging these site selection tools so that we have a dynamic read on everything we do moving forward, and we know exactly where we're adding resources and why.
So that concludes our presentation. First and foremost, thank you so much, each of you, for taking some valuable time out of your conference to join us and listen to us talk for a little while. We really appreciate that all of you came out. Please remember to complete the survey, and we would be happy to accept any questions that anyone has at this time. Yes, sir.
Are y'all using Tableau at all from an assortment standpoint? You know, which kiosks are more likely to be successful with children's movies versus horror flicks?
So we do have data on that. That's a separate content process, but we have enough information on a transactional level, and our team uses SQL regularly, so those are items that we evaluate and look into. We're not using it on a Tableau perspective, but we do have some dashboards that cover content-related items.
Yes, sir.
I have a question. So you guys did this rebalancing thing, which I think is really cool. I guess is that someone like your team that does the algorithms, the logic behind that? And if so, what tools do you use to kind of get that kind of stuff done, productionize that logic?
Yeah, so our team worked with the technology team to build out a rebalancing model, and we transitioned it over to technology. And the basis of the model was pretty simple. We essentially looked at all of our title level at a kiosk basis after a week had passed, and we said, if typical kiosks get 10 copies of a title, how is this kiosk performing relative to average? So if it was performing twice as good or it was turning twice as much, then we determined that ideally that would have twice as much product as a typical kiosk, and that was what would happen in the model, and the model would incorporate the route structure that we had. So that was run every day. It was transitioned over into an existing process, and it just became something that when people showed up, the kiosk already indicated to them what exactly they needed to take out, and they would put them in the right machines moving forward.
Yes, ma'am. So the question for those over there that may not have heard it was, is Tableau helping us on the sales and marketing front, identifying customers that maybe have gone several months without renting? Am I summarizing your question correctly? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
There you go.
To be succinct. But yeah, the entire organization uses it, and it's really because you take something that might be one query that you run, you put it in Excel together, you do that once and you always have to recreate it, or you can put together a dynamic view that shows how often your customers are visiting kiosks, when they're returning, and now once you put that extra bit of work in, you always have it and can reference it. So to the extent that organizations have Tableau, which is pretty much everyone at Redbox, they're using them for things like that.
Yes, sir.
Are you leveraging Tableau server more for the distribution of these or desktop?
Yes, we are. Yeah, we published a Tableau server. Obviously, our field team then can access it via their laptop. We're also right now efforting getting some smaller devices into their hands, making them a little bit more mobile and portable, so looking to leverage some of that usage as well.
But our field, all of them have laptops along with air cards, so they were literally looking into reports while in the car, while merchandising kiosk on a daily basis.
Do you use core version of Tableau server?
Do we use what?
Core-based license? Or
That would be whoever, not sure, whoever negotiated the contract would know that.
Yeah.
So.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Can you speak to the research that you had to do with your field staff to understand some of the challenges?
Any challenges in particular, or just across?
With the current reporting and how you use dashboards to solve the problems.
Sure.
Understanding the problems.
Sure. So my team, again, we work very closely with the field team. And one of the practices that I put into place several years ago is that anything we want to release to the field, I want it to be a tool that they want to use. I don't want just to hand you something and say, here, use this, without getting your feedback first. So we go through a process by which we gather some volunteers, sometimes voluntolds, and bring them in and use them as a focus group and say, tell us about the problems that you're having. The weekly merchandising dashboard is a great example of that. We actually, that's about, what you saw today is probably the 6th or 7th iteration of that dashboard, because we released one to a focus group and said, use this for a week or two, then come back and tell us what you like. Please tell us what you don't like, because we want to get rid of it. There's enough information that we want to get on there that we want to make sure you have everything at your fingertips. So that's a practice that we try to use whenever we release something out to our field team, as opposed to just us dictating and pushing something out. It's a give and take process, and we're looking for as much feedback as we can get. Because I feel like if I release a tool that no one wants to use, what was the point? I've wasted my time, and I don't like to waste my time. So I would prefer to make something that people want, and that people are telling me this is what I need. Did you have a question right in the front?
Yeah, you kind of covered it. I was going to talk about utilization and how you're ensuring they're utilizing it. It sounds like you. That's it. So, do you guys monitor utilization at the end of the day? As you got through your 7th iteration, are you doing some type of BI, top of BI, just making sure that when that folks are using your tools and if they're not, can you talk a little bit about that?
We do have usage statistics on the server, so we can. I would say right now it's not a practice that we get into. Obviously, if we have someone that's struggling, some of the first questions that ops leaders may be asking is, are you using the tools that have been provided to you? Right? That starts the conversations. As we hire new folks, as we bring them in, we really try to get those tools in front of them as quickly as possible, because it's easier to train up someone who's brand new than, as they say, to try to teach an old dog new tricks.
Yep, and that same point in rebalancing, our team was having bi-weekly calls with everyone, regional supervisors, regional managers, to explain, here's the initial version, and as Pete mentioned, there were 6 or 7 different iterations. So I think it's really understanding that it's a collective process, and ultimately people in the field are far more important to driving that success. That open dialogue made it so we knew we weren't putting something out there that they weren't going to leverage.
All right. Well, thank you again. Really appreciate you taking your time. Don't forget to take the survey, and everybody enjoy the rest of the conference.